Welcome to the Longevity Formula with Dr. Brandon Crawford. Let's explore the new era of wellness.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining the show. Welcome back to the Longevity Formula podcast. Today is very exciting. I get to have a very unique guest, someone that I know personally. This is actually my wife's sister, right?
We are family.
There you go. So this is my sister-in-law, and there's too many tangents that we could honestly go on because I've known you since high school, actually before, right? So started dating Sarah in high school and knew you well before then. So this is going to be fun. There's no way for me to really tell the audience who you are because there's too many things. Too many things. I could introduce you as so many different professional titles and you're a mom and you're a wife and all these things, right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is this. Can you please tell me who you are first, and then we're going to go into your story, how you got here.
Okay, absolutely. So my name is Autumn Lockett, and I think if I were to have to describe who I am in one word, I would say I'm a teacher. I'm a lifelong teacher. Sarah can tell you that as a little girl, we played a lot of school. And I really believe that education is the way out. Education doesn't always happen in a classroom, but that was my medium. I went to undergrad at Texas A&M, to be a teacher, graduated with a job, and was really excited. I was a first-gen college student, and so seeing that education give me an immediate outlet to work was a gift. That's the goal. And so I taught here in Texas for 3 years, and then my husband applied to law school, and we moved to Oklahoma, and that was a big change for us. But we moved to the state, and he worked his way into a great law school experience there, had a great scholarship, and I was asked to apply as the admissions counselor. And it was one of those times in my life where I was still going to be working in education, but I wasn't going to be a teacher anymore. I felt like an imposter. Do you know anything about imposter syndrome, Dr. Crawford? Yeah.
That's funny. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if I think it's maybe especially hard for people who come from a small town because there's just a lot of questioning, like, am I good enough to be here? Can I do this? And so when I was asked to apply as the admissions counselor, I argued with them and they argued with me, and I decided to just try it. And applied. I was the admissions counselor for about 6 months and then was promoted to be the interim director. And then I was director of admissions for about 8 years at the College of Law. And that was my first step into higher ed, and it was incredible. Being able to see people applying to come to law school, and people don't just wake up one day and decide to go to law school. They want to come to law school because they have a passion. They had some kind of interaction with the law, or they have a cause they believe in, and they know that their JD is going to give them the power to argue and advocate. And so I love just sitting with students, listening to their stories, helping shepherd them through the admissions process. And then we did a lot of innovation in the admissions process because our population of students didn't look like an East Coast law school population.
A little different in Oklahoma, huh?
A little bit different. But the original crew had modeled their admissions processes after what every other law school was doing, and it just didn't quite fit our population. And so bringing in some innovative things to make the degree more approachable, to strip away all the pretense, it's hard enough. We don't have to try to inflate this and make it harder than it is. And just making it approachable, I think that is one thing that I was just really excited to do. And so worked there in higher ed as the director of admissions, took a couple of years off to work in the nonprofit space. And now I'm back with OU working as the director of admissions for the College of Medicine.
Right. So there's a lot to unpack there, which obviously this is why I couldn't introduce you because there's too much.
It's a lot.
So number one, you're a high performer. Okay, so that's a big deal, and that's a big reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you today. We both came from small town Texas. It's crazy that you just said imposter syndrome. I literally was listening to, I think it was TD Jakes. Anyway, it was another podcast or episode or something talking about imposter syndrome just yesterday. So you're right. I was told not only by friends, but even some other, pretty close people in my life that I was overreaching, You know, you come from the small town and you're talking about doing all these things. That's too much. You know, you're overreaching.
You're too big for your britches.
Exactly. Yes, that was the general context, right? And so it's important for not just those high achievers to hear this message, because there's going to be a lot to go into, but it's also important for the people like you and I growing up in these little towns that you can do more, you can influence the world. And that's a huge message of encouragement that we want to get out there. So you started your career in education. You're a teacher. You're a fourth grade teacher. Yeah.
That's right.
And now you went all the way up to professional school, to law school, to medical school, helping people with admissions, helping change systems, right?
Right.
I mean, you mentioned turning systems on their head. Can
Absolutely.
you give me a little insight into what does that look like? How do you even enter? Because when you went to OU, I don't know all the details here, but when you went to OU Law, there were some things that needed to be changed,
yes.
right? And you helped initiate those changes and help carry out those changes. And now the school's in a better place. So can you maybe talk a little bit? I know you probably can't divulge everything, but
sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like and what did you do?
Absolutely. So I always try when I enter a new space to sit on my hands for 6 months and observe before I make any changes. And you know me well enough to know that lasts for about 2.5 weeks. And I'm like, all right, well, we're just going to change a couple of things.
If that, yeah.
So one thing that I noticed is the students would meet each other at orientation. And they all know that their rank matters, their grades matter. They're feeling very competitive. If you've ever seen Legally Blonde, it's not so very different. And they would meet each other in the courtroom. They're all suited up. They're swearing in on this leather-bound constitution. It's very pedantic. And in law school, they're sorted into 4 sections. It's sort of like their Hogwarts houses. And they would meet their section mates at orientation. And I just felt like it was such a missed opportunity because relationships, I know as a classroom teacher, building relationships between my students is going to evoke better success for everybody involved. And so the next year, what we did is we had a section release party. It was hosted in the dean's backyard. We brought in live music, taco trucks. Everybody wore their Tommy Bahama shirts and their sundresses. And at a certain point in the evening, with live music, the band stops, they open a gift, they find out what their section is in June. And we start building relationships so that when they come to the courtroom and swear in as attorneys to uphold all their ethics in August, they've already been friends for 2 months.
That's
and
awesome.
This was twofold. So it was good for my students, but it was also good for me getting my class sat. When SMU called and said, you're off the wait list, well, I've already met all my section mates. I built this relationship. And so it was twofold, and it was just a benefit to everybody.
Absolutely. So you're already setting the stage for a discussion later in how relationship building is pivotal, not just in our professional life, but then also in our everyday life. Mm-hmm. And then even what we're going to get into is how to advocate for yourself and how this has an influence there. So that's amazing. It really is. And to dovetail into some of the discussions that we've had on the podcast thus far, right? So that gets us into the polyvagal discussions, right? And how our ventral vagal system, that newest part of the vagal system, how that's so important to allow us to form those relationships and those bonds, and how traumas begin to degrade those networks and to deteriorate those areas, and that sometimes we're met with our own neurology beginning to work against us, beginning to put us into that fight or flight or that PTSD state, that anxiety state and whatnot. So just an interesting discussion. And really, I mean, you're a highly intelligent person, but you haven't had this type of clinical background, yet you've uncovered it in navigating these scenarios, and you've been able to identify that. I think that's important to acknowledge, and kudos to you, really for understanding that, because I've never spoken to a non-medical person that understood that, yet alone a medical person that understands that. So
right.
Very, very interesting. So I guess I have a question that's kind of come to mind. Is there a difference in working with 4th grade students and working with professional school students? And are there similarities?
Right. So I was going to say yes and no. So the similarities, they're different in that a 4th grade student is in that classroom because they have to be legally. And so you have some as a fourth grade teacher, you have to really incentivize and motivate some of those students, because some of them are only there because mom and dad and the law said they have to be there. When you look at students who are in professional school, they are highly motivated. They know why they're there. They want to be at the top of their class. They want to get that dream job. They want to do the very best. They want to earn more scholarship dollars. They're very motivated. But at the same time, they are all students. The similarity is a fourth grade student and a first year medical student feel shaky in their boots. They want to know if they have what it takes to sit here and be successful. They want to know the people around them care about them and are going to be safe. They want to know that they're safe to explore and learn. And I think creating that kind of environment is really where the secret sauce is in all of those scenarios.
Right. So we have this natural foundation, right? Even that begins from before entering the fourth grade. And that carries on with us. And it's important to realize and to note that even though you're entering law school, medical school, all these things, we still have to foster a very similar type of environment.
Absolutely.
And that's lost. And we're told just to put on your big boy pants and go and do and you know, don't cry about it. Leave your emotions at the door and like all these things, right? And that sets the stage for emotional instability. And that does not brew the type of society that I think we all want to really live and thrive in, which is a great kind of segue, because prior to doing the show, we were kind of talking about how the pandemic has changed the world and really defined some of these new social, I don't want to call them norms, but it's changed our society socially and relationally.
Well, like you don't have a green dot on your forehead. During the pandemic, everyone we met with was on Zoom. And so you learned how to look at the green dot to make sure someone understood that you were listening to them. And then when we went back into seeing people in person, it was like, wait a minute, where's your green dot? Which eye do I look at? This is so awkward. I don't know how to people anymore.
Right. Exactly. I love the statement. I don't know how to people anymore. A lot of the clinical cases I'm seeing, whether it's neurodevelopmental issues or even chronic pain syndromes, are coming in with these social networks are damaged. And I'm not going to say it's all because of the pandemic, but I will say that there's been an increase in these types of problems since the pandemic. So would you say that the pandemic helped define who you are and where you are now? Is that a statement that we could say?
Absolutely.
And can you maybe give us some insight into that? So how did going through that process for you shape who you are and where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as humans, we live in community. And in normal times, right? How many unprecedented times do we have to live through? But in normal times, you may be going through a hard time, but someone else in your community is having a rock steady time. Someone else in your community is at the peak. They're doing amazing. And you sort of buoy your own low experiences with other people. The tricky thing about the pandemic was we were all in a free fall and nobody knew what was happening. So everything we were doing was motivated out of fear.
Yes.
And it got to a point where we're 18 months into this thing and we're still, you can't run a marathon on a sprint pace. And that's what it felt like to me. And so just zooming in to myself, I, in the beginning was eating total junk because it was a way to feel safe. I was not moving my body. I had the news on all the time. My husband lost his job, so I was working like 4 jobs. It was intense, and I wasn't prioritizing my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health, any of that.
Right.
And I just sort of had a wake-up call one day, and I was like, I've got to move my body. I've got to prioritize eating good, healthy food. I have to do these things that I know will make me feel good, even though I don't feel like doing them. And once I started, it was sort of like everything else. It didn't get better, but it shifted into a sharper focus of what I needed to focus on.
Right. Yeah. Well, so it's like, how you need a certain amount of stress to grow the best grape crop, So, I would obviously argue that there was too much stress during that time, but it was a stressor, and that stressor changed you. It moved you. So being the high performer you are, I want everyone to realize that I would say you were thriving. I know that there were struggles.
Sure.
But from a professional stance, I mean, you just said you were working 4 jobs.
I was.
And so how were you able, what was your mindset? What were you doing to enable you to do 4 jobs and have how many kids?
I had 4 at the time.
4 at the time.
Now I have 5.
Yeah. So marriage, kids, 4 jobs, and not, I mean, honestly, not doing a half-assed job, right? I mean,
I don't know how. I wish I knew how.
Exactly. 100% here, 100% here, 100% here. So, and you mentioned movement. You mentioned some things about nutrition. Like, what are some things that you were learning on your own? I mean, really, because again, that's who you are. That's why you're here.
Right.
So,
right.
What were you doing?
So, like, granularly, like, you want me to tell you, like, what I was doing?
Anything you want.
Okay. So at first I started doing some carb cycling that went along with like a workout routine. And then I sort of paid attention to which days felt better to me. And what I found was that having a lot of sugar and carbs made me feel slow.
Yeah.
It made me feel, I was having a lot of eczema. I felt like I was really puffy. I have some metal allergies, which is like maybe the nerdiest thing I've ever said out loud. But I did an experiment. I was like, let me just try for 2 months to just take away all of that and really focus on protein, good healthy fats, lots of water, sitting in the sunshine as much as I could, and then continuing to do good HIIT sort of cardio, and not a crazy amount, like 30 minutes a day. And then I was walking with kiddos. And I just felt my skin is smooth, my joints are moving easy, my hair is shiny, my nails are growing, and I'm able to eat all the foods that I love. And so for me to be able to conquer that and to stick with it felt like it was something I could control.
Yeah.
In a time when I didn't have control over a whole lot.
And that's huge. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you were able to find strategies through movement, through light exposure, through various nutritional, which I love all the nutrition that you just described, and fully support it, to help you navigate a stressful time, but not just navigate it, but again, to thrive, right? And it's just so cool because we really haven't gone through like even the longevity formula pillars. I kind of mentioned them to you, but you just kind of outlined pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
So that's great.
And it's not a quick hit.
No.
Like there are those dopamine hits that you can get that you're like, oh yay, now I feel great. It's slow and steady.
Exactly.
But you can maintain it because
Absolutely.
It is slow and steady.
Yes. And that's, something I like to talk about, and I haven't talked about it much, but I think I need to more, is the concept of life is won or lost through our mundane Tuesdays. And
that's beautiful.
It's the daily grind.
Yeah.
It's because, Friday's exciting, the weekend's exciting, Monday's like blah. And then, you have all these days of the week that have this emotion attached to it. Tuesday's just Tuesday, right? But that's life. So the majority of life, if you really look at it, is Tuesday. The majority of life is Tuesday. And so if we go through life just looking for that dopamine hit, like you just said, like I just want the excitement, I just want the weekend, you missed 5 days of the week. How much life is missed if that's what you're living for, right? And so you're right, you're creating something sustainable. And I describe that as a type of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity happens on a minute-to-minute basis, right? And so what you just said is you created a neuroplastic state that allowed your prefrontal cortex to gate the amygdala and to gate your limbic response that was being exacerbated and ramified by the trauma going on everywhere.
Yeah.
You were able to create plasticity within that part of the brain to allow yourself to navigate the way you wanted to navigate, rather than how the world wanted you to navigate, right? I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's a great merging of what I say and what you've experienced, and it's fantastic. So thanks. That wasn't even staged. That was beautiful. I love that.
We just came to it.
So you want to bring messages of encouragement. Okay, that's when I asked you, what are your goals? You said, I want to encourage people. I want to help people. And you talked a lot about values and how there's a lot of introspection that goes on in defining your values and being able to advocate for yourself. And I love, what did you say? being able to create superlatives for yourself.
Yeah.
And so can you kind of elaborate on that for me, please?
Absolutely. When we're children, we sort of absorb the values of our families of origin, where you came from. And that's great. But sometimes where you came from is where you want to be from. And sometimes where you came from is something you want to learn from and move along. And, I have some friends who had very rough raisings, and they can still learn from those spaces where they were. It's like mushrooms. What do mushrooms grow in?
Yeah.
Right? Compost.
Exactly.
But like mushrooms are amazing and they're powerful and they're delicious on a pizza and can like change your brain and do incredible things. And so where you're from doesn't have to necessarily like dictate where you're going. So learn from it and move on. And I think giving yourself the permission to ask yourself if these values, and when I say values, I mean things like, I want to be a positive influence. One of my core values is I'm a good mom. And that's important to me. And so sometimes I find myself feeling a little agitated, or like something's just, it's like a chord on the piano that's not quite right. And I feel like things are off. And if I ask myself, why am I feeling so antsy about this? Why am I anxious? Why does the world seem off tilt? And it's like, oh, my core value of being a good mom is being questioned.
Right.
Like, I feel like this experience is reflecting, and I'm not a good mom. So like, what can I do to square this situation? And so those kind of core values, I'm a good wife. I'm a good sister-in-law. I'm a good aunt. I'm a hard worker. That's really important to me.
Right.
I'm efficient with my time. I have a good energy. Like, I find a reason to celebrate. We talked about that not everything is a celebration, but there's something to celebrate.
Absolutely.
Every day.
And you should.
Absolutely. And you create that space. And I just think, especially when you're the adult in the room, when you have these little people who are looking to you, just making sure that you're checking in with those values and that you're aligning what you do in your life with your values, reassessing them, writing them down.
Yeah.
And then making sure that when you come to a hard decision, you don't have to make a pro-con list. You look at your list of values and you think, is this decision this way going to serve more of those values or this way? And taking those steps, it's just a really powerful thing that you as a human have to do. And no one else is going to advocate for your core values like you will.
Right.
Because they don't know.
Exactly. So essentially creating a filter system. And whatever you go into, whatever is brought to you, needs to go through this core values filtering, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. And I love that you said good, because perfect is the antithesis of good.
Right.
And if we expect ourselves to be perfect, we will lose.
Every time.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you were in this. Did you ever have Miss Christian?
No.
Okay, so she was our GT teacher. And
I wasn't smart back then.
You were smart.
I was chewing on crayons and eating glue.
Now listen, you're not advocating for yourself now. So she had a sign in her room that said, never accept good enough as good enough. And it seems like a really positive message. But when you say that to high achieving people, what they hear is, I've got to go 100 miles an hour and be completely perfect every single day, all the time. And unraveling that and like unsubscribing from that mantra in my life that like, it's good. Like It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not a machine.
Right. Like
my human effort on Wednesday is going to look different than my human effort on Saturday, but I showed up every day. Exactly.
So there's a self-grace period, right? There's this room in that pursuit for, I know I'm going to mess up, but this is my core value and this is what I'm going to show up to do. And I'm going to do it 100% to the best of my abilities. And that's what we can do. And that helps to really shape and define our neuroplasticity, our life, our whole experience. That's awesome. So part of what you do, right? So we're going to go back to some of these beginning statements and about what you do, right? So you help with admissions into law school and medical school.
That's right.
Well, before we do this, is there a difference in the admissions process? This can be high level in law school and medical school.
There is a big difference. People who apply to law school come from a vast array of majors. There's not a prerequisite. You don't have to take poli-sci or constitutional law. You can be a bassoon major and come to law school.
Nice. I've had some attorneys that majored in that.
Music majors were some of my very, very best applicants, to be honest with you. lots of neuroplasticity, right?
There you
In that
go.
study. And in med school, it is a little bit more prescribed. It's a little more of a sterile process. And so it is fair and calibrated and all of those things, but it's definitely, it's a completely different animal.
Yeah. This will be subjective, but do you have a preference into which admissions process you prefer?
That is so hard. But the teacher heart in me, I really loved the law school admissions process because there was just a little bit more flexibility.
Right. You get to know the person, not just the score.
That's right. And in med school, you have to hit certain metrics before you can even have an interview.
Right.
And so I feel like there are still some applicants who I think would be amazing doctors, but I don't really get to interface with them and say like, hey, if you would do this, this, and this, we could get you there. Because the volume is just so different.
Right. So what you specialize in really, and what even I would say you've developed your own methodology in, is helping people stand out.
Yeah.
So you help people stand out through an interview process, an application process, but it doesn't stop there, right? So if I could say that Autumn Lockett is a specialist in something, could I say that Autumn specializes in helping people understand how to stand out in life?
Yes, and helping people know how to tell their story.
Yes. So elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think before you can tell your story, you have to understand your story. And I think that it's really hard in a capitalist society where there's a scarcity mindset. I have to get mine, and I have to put my heel on the face of anyone who's below me. I'm not going to hold the door open for me, for people who may come along behind me. I'm going to get mine while the getting's good.
Right.
And that kind of mindset might seem like, oh yeah, like that's great. You're going to get what's coming your way. But there's so much beauty in being able to tell a story that does hold the door open for people coming along behind you. And I think when you're entering in that mindset and walking through your days of your life, knowing that you're telling a story, is this a story I'm going to be proud to tell?
Right. Right. So you're the author of your story.
Yeah.
And it's still being written.
Yes. And you can change your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can change your mind, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean that you're weak. And I think that's something that I had to do a lot of during the pandemic, post-pandemic, because black and white thinking isn't going to serve me personally. And so finding gray space and soft space and holding space for people to be different and for me to still love the heck out of them was a really important part of my story.
Absolutely. So you've told me that you're willing to help anyone that's listening.
Yeah.
Right? So if someone is trying to navigate, this whole, not even just only professional school, but some type of school admissions process.
That's right.
Right? Then feel free to reach out to Autumn. Can you give your email address?
Sure. It's Autumn, like the season, AUTUMN .Lockett, LOCKETT with 2 T's, @gmail.com.
Perfect.
Maybe you'll put it in show notes.
Yes. We will put it in show notes. We'll put it on the website. We'll flash it on the screen.
Love it.
We'll do all the things. We'll probably put it right across your forehead. So, all right. So is there anything you want to tell the world? Anything else you want to say before we close here?
Yeah, I think just don't be afraid to think of yourself in superlatives.
Yeah.
That you can be the best at things, and it doesn't have to mean that you're perfect at it, but if you're doing your best, that's enough.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in. And as always, if this message resonates with you, if there's anyone in your life that you feel can benefit from anything that we talked about today, please share this information. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're taking our time. That's why Autumn's baby is over here in the corner, right? Because
nobody puts baby in the corner.
Well, she's with Sarah, right? So it's not like she's just sitting in a corner. But she's here because she wants to help people. I'm here because I want to help people, but we need you to help us to help others. So please share this, subscribe, and as always, thank you so much for joining us today.
We hope today's episode has inspired you to take that next step toward your best self. Remember, the path to longevity is paved with small, daily decisions. Your journey is unique, and every step, every choice, brings you closer to your ultimate vision of a healthier, happier life. For more insights, tips, and resources, visit drbrandoncrawford.com.